Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Welcome. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
You spent a good portion of your career in the music sector,
right?
But now you're devoting much of your time to First Nations education under the Dogwood 25 initiative. Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, I live here. I live out west. I moved from Montreal in 1975, and I think it's part of the reality of living in the West that Aboriginal people are a very significant part of who we are, and over the years have grown in numbers. Matter of fact, the largest growing group amongst us are Aboriginal people. So that includes Aboriginal kids going into schools. I also believe in public schools, and I think that the best way to develop a good public education system is really incorporate all the kids that would be involved. And
because that's what we do with the rest of the population.
That's right. That's right. Now, when it comes to Aboriginal people, depending upon what their status is and depending upon whether they live on reserves, there always is the possibility of reserve schools. We're focusing on the public school system, and in particular, being in the Lower Mainland, there are very few reserve schools available. And we've also found out that over 73% of the children at one stage or another will go to a public school. So that's why we're concentrating on that. So I feel that the school system has to change, has to adapt to the fact that it's really multicultural, and First Nations people and Aboriginal people consider themselves multicultural in their own right. And I also think that when you look at the numbers, Aboriginal kids don't do as well in school as
they do not.
non-Aboriginal children. Some of the statistics, and they're still collecting statistics to determine just to what extent, but we do know, for example, in the Lower Mainland, that the graduation rate is at least 20% lower than the graduation rate of non-Aboriginal children. So you ask yourself the question, why?
Yeah.
And part of the reason is the lack of interest of Aboriginal kids, perhaps because they don't know why they're there. Why go to school? And I think that ultimately the idea of combining mentorship programs which really help Aboriginal kids really start out well, from kindergarten on, and the idea that there is a job at the other end of the line, that ultimately we know that in this province, as time goes on, there are going to be more and more jobs available in various areas of the province, which would be wonderful for Aboriginal kids to participate in, not having to leave home, to be able to stay where they are, be supported, and have a great job. And I'm thinking of the energy sector, I'm thinking of agriculture. There are so many areas that will be opening up, which will be hopefully full employment in the future.
And of course, forestry and mining aren't going away. So
Right.
and there are increasing opportunities in those sectors as well.
What I hear is that companies like Hydro and some of the energy-based companies are looking for Aboriginal workers and can't find qualified workers. So what do we mean by qualified? Workers that have the Dogwood certificate, the high school leaving certificate, and not the booby prize or the second prize, but a full Dogwood certificate. In order to do that, there's lots of academics that have to happen. And the academics can't start in high school, and they certainly can't start in grade 10, and they can't start in grade 12. It's got to start all the way back to K. Aboriginal people have great support systems, particularly those who live on reserves, who have extended families. Mm-hmm. But once they go across the street, if you will, to a public school, that's where we have to kick in and make sure that they feel welcome, that the curriculum is adapted in a way, and not revolutionarily, but adapted so that Aboriginal kids could see their role in it and also have pride of accomplishment. And that's what we're trying to do.
So walk me through the program. How's it going to work? And starting with kindergarten, what is it that you're going to be bringing to the education equation that traditionally hasn't been there, that addresses the needs of First Nation students?
Well, kindergarten is the very first transition. So you go from, as I said, a very warm, welcoming environment that Aboriginal kids have, particularly with the elders participating in their education, to going into a public school. And what we find there is that the absentee rate is very high, the sick rate is high, the seasonal aspects at times are very difficult as well. So September is not a great time for Aboriginal people to start school. There's a lot going on in their lives, etc. So what we are doing, and we have a pilot program at the moment, which is into its third year, is providing group mentorships with Aboriginal people, mentoring these young people in terms of what they should expect in school and why they're there, and using some very interesting electronic technology to increase literacy, which is number one, and also to increase the ability to do well in other academic subjects.
So by electronic technology, you're talking about the gamification of learning, which I know is happening everywhere right now.
Right. There's a lot of discussion of gamification. Where we feel that we have an edge in terms of using these technologies is that we're working with academics. We're working with the top Aboriginal academics in this province, and we're also hoping to work with companies who will adapt their gamification to the academic part. What we find is a lot of the gamification doesn't have strong academics. And that's what we're after, because we feel that the young people will do well to get a good certificate, and in order to do that, we have to be strong on the academics.
I got to get you to hang on for just a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. When we factor in also some, as you pointed out, a higher absentee rate, a lack of understanding why they're there, how do you start to address some of those situations, recognizing that you're trying to say, I want you to be a part of the whole, I want you to have the same tools and resources that everybody else has so that you can realize your full potential because you're armed with that Dogwood certificate?
Well, that's where the idea of why you're there comes in. And we're working with Corey Wilson, who is working in the college community on developing ideas of skills and skills training, and where those skill training aspects lead. So for example, she's done skills training at the college level. We want to adapt what she has done and others have done, Vancouver Community College has done, BCIT has done, to high school and even pre-high school, so that the young Aboriginal students will see what the possibilities are and therefore move towards those possibilities. The other aspect is to really build pride. I know that when I was a young person going to school in Montreal, pride of accomplishment was very important. And ultimately, when it comes to academics, being pushed really is the best way to do it. And the comfort zone has to be there as well. So for Aboriginal children, why you're there and what you intend to accomplish and what is that incredible job at the other end of the line. I'll say that we tend to overestimate the idea that most people are geared for college or university, and that's not necessarily the case.
Most people aren't.
No, whether it's Aboriginal young people or people from various countries that have come to Canada, or all of us, it's 20% really. It's 1 in 5 or less.
I think it's less than that. You know, I understand that there was a survey that was done a number of years ago. In 9th and 10th grade, students and their parents, about 85% all believe that they're going to go on to a post-secondary education that is university-based. The reality is less than 20% of them make it there.
That's right. And if we keep that in mind, then we really do have to start in kindergarten. We do have to look at the transition years of how to get, as we are this year, by the way, in our 3rd year of our program, we are really concentrating on grade 7 to high school, because that's where we feel, like middle year schools or whatever designation, we really feel that that's key, because by then, young people should have an idea of what they want to do and a realistic idea of what they want to do. So if we emphasize that, and then we see that academics are still important, whether or not you go to university or not. Literacy is very important. Aboriginal kids, like many other children these days, don't read a lot before they get to school. So kindergarten, grade 1 becomes an important access point for reading. using electronics, such as iPads that have specialty apps, we can get young people reading. We did it with a project we did at Musqueam called Bridge Through Sport, where we actually had a program in creative writing, where after the first year, 4 of the students were writing in a national magazine. And these were students who had not read very much before.
So earlier this year, I had Graydon Nicholas, former Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick, in talking about this very topic. And I came back to him a couple times and said, so what's at the foundation of how do we instill this sense of worth, esteem, pride that you mentioned earlier in young First Nations? And he said that we still have to work on the healing process. And that becomes a component. And how do you address that in the program that you're putting forward?
Yeah, well, first, disclaimer. I'm sitting here as a white person. I don't have white hair anymore. I have no hair. And I'm talking about a subject which is not directly relevant to my background.
Yes.
But I'm doing it as an academic. And I feel that what I've learned is that regardless of the culture, regardless of background, the idea of taking pride and ownership is very important. But when it comes to Aboriginal people, there have been a lot of broken promises. There have been a lot of missteps. I mean, the whole idea of taking someone's culture away from them for whatever reason is absolutely wrong. What I feel, and what people that we work with feel, because the majority of our board are Aboriginal people. I just happen to have had the idea along with Mike Harcourt and started this, but our impetus is with many, many Aboriginal people who believe in what we're doing. The impetus is to provide the pride, to move forward rather than backwards. And yes, healing is very important. When you look at the reconciliation aspects that are going on now, a lot of the points that are raised really are the idea of taking pride and ownership of one's future. The way you do that is by having that certificate, by having that ability to move forward with a Dogwood certificate in our province and high school leaving certificates of other kinds in other provinces. And I've talked to a number of people who've been in charge of ministries and also a number of people who've been, for example, in the territories, and they say the same thing, that getting the graduation rate up, getting the pride in those who are in school, and moving them through with a proper mentorship is important. These children see a lot of adults in their lives, and what we're trying to do is provide a continuum and also provide for an Aboriginal continuum. There are so many wonderful Aboriginal teachers who don't have employment, some who have retired as well, who really want to help out. So that is the basis of what we're trying to do.
Unfortunately, I got to get you to hang on for one more minute here while we take another quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. I was in Winnipeg earlier this year, North Winnipeg. There is a program there called Pathways,
Yes.
directed at Aboriginal teenagers, helping them graduate from high school. And in talking to the program director, he said, a couple of the components of our program that make us successful is we're there after school, we're warm, we're dry, we give them a meal. And he says, and you may think that that's not much. He said, but you got to remember, life in Aboriginal Canada is still very different from the rest of us. A lot of these kids go to school in the morning and don't know whether or not they're going to have a home to come home to at the end of the day. So are there aspects of what you're doing that help to address that so that the child feels secure that they're going to be looked after?
Absolutely. So it goes back to your point that the program is a latchkey program. So it's after school. We do not interfere with the teaching that goes on. We don't interfere with the teachers, but we do provide a place, a safe place, to really use the technologies that are being developed with the mentors for an after-school program, which would involve food. We also include the mothers if they are interested. And certainly the last couple of years we've had programs at the beginning of the program, also at the end of the program.
To get them engaged,
them
because they
engaged.
are an integral part, aren't
Absolutely,
they? Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with chief and council. We're not dealing with the guys. We're dealing with the mothers, and we're dealing with the children. And we feel that that really does work in that way. So yes, it's very important. And there are a lot of very good Aboriginal programs in the schools. Where we're trying to really make a mark is on the academic side. So there are friend-raising programs, there are programs involving visitations. We've done a lot in the last couple of years to Science World and other facilities. We do give out prizes, etc. But we feel that as we move on, that our contribution, because of the very strong academic inputs that we're getting, are on literacy and coursework.
So it's still early days,
Yes.
But as you're moving towards this first group that are moving towards graduation, what do their prospects look like as they move beyond secondary school?
Well, the prospects in terms of employment, as we've said, is much higher than it ever has been, and we're quite sure of that. There have been many successful stories too. We have to say that. We're going to be doing a workshop in the spring where we're bringing together some of the successful education programs that have occurred in our province. And there are certain districts that have done very well in terms of improving the graduation rate. But in our case, we feel that the first steps have to be to get more engagement, to lay the dream out there that ultimately there will be a future, and there is a future if it's through going to school and being educated, if you will. But I think the main challenge is to make the school classroom relevant, and that can be done in two ways. First, by curriculum that really speaks to these young people, and secondly, the relevancy of a work placement at the end of the trail.
It's remarkable to me in talking to 2 or 3 of the young men and women who were going through the Pathways program in Winnipeg. They would say with I become verklempt thinking about this because it's really quite moving that you get some young guy who goes, I'm going to be the first person in my family ever to graduate from high school, and I'm going to go to university and I'm going to look after my mom.
Well, that's
it's
wonderful.
Pretty like, wow.
Guess what? I was the first person in my family to finish. So I think ultimately, depending upon your generation and depending upon what's ahead of us, I think we've all been through this. I think what has happened here is a lot of stutters, a lot of missteps, and that has affected the ability of Aboriginal kids to move forward.
Well, and unfortunately, we have the legacy of the residential school program,
Absolutely.
which did almost the exact opposite of what we're talking. Well, it did the exact opposite of what we're talking about. It destroyed culture.
Right.
And so we still have to come to terms with that.
I agree. I agree. And there's a long way to go, but I find there's a lot of goodwill. I know that there are people who have stepped forward to help us out. Both in the private sector. There's a group called Education Without Borders, which does mentorship work around the world, and they've partially funded our program. So there's a lot of goodwill out there. And I think there's a lot of goodwill among the families as well, who really want to see their children succeed. So we don't have all the answers, but it certainly isn't to take an Aboriginal person, remove their culture, and put them into a public setting. On the contrary, I think ultimately Aboriginal kids, with their culture, with the pride and respect, are integrated into a system that really speaks to them.
Final break, promise. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. Well, I envision a day that mirrors something that I heard former Prime Minister John Chrétien say just down the street here at the dedication of the China Gate. He said, we have opened our arms to the people of the world and invited them to join us in the building of a truly blessed nation. And I'm hoping that we're opening our arms to include all Canadians, especially those First Nations that we've excluded in the past, because I think that the benefit to us all will be extraordinary. As we move forward, with your program, you're in urban sort of southwest coast of
Right.
British Columbia. Where do you go from here?
Well, we've already had visitations from Aboriginal leaders in Burnaby and in Surrey and in the Comox Valley. So we're looking at next steps being expanding the program. And by then we hope it's turnkey program so that the technologies that we're adapting will be completed hopefully by the end of this current year.
So what do you need to be able to help you to do that? Because this doesn't happen without resources.
We're really looking at corporate funding. We're hoping that the energy-based companies come forward because it's in their interest, and they know that. Matter of fact, Fortis has already provided startup grants for us. Also, some private people who really believe in this program, and we're hoping that they'll help us as well. It's not a lot of money, so there's a lot of goodwill involved, a lot of people who are giving us their time and their energy. So we're hopeful.
Well, if you take a look at the Pathways program in Winnipeg, the level of corporate sponsorship is quite high, and I think that from what I understand, everybody, all those organizations that have contributed to it feel that it was an investment in the future of this country, not just Winnipeg, but for all of us. And if the model can work there, I'm hoping that that model can work for you as well.
Oh, we hope, we hope. There's always hope, and this is a good time,
Yeah.
I think. It's beginnings.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, one of our board members' sister is now the Minister of Justice. I mean, who would have thought?
Isn't that amazing?
So I
Yeah.
think that ultimately it's going to keep us moving forward.
There was a young man who had gone through one of the programs, and I said, if you were talking to somebody else who was like, I don't know, what's the point? Why should I do that? And he said, well, because the number one thing you get out of this is self-confidence.
Right.
And I asked him, why is that important? And he said something that was just magic. He said, because confidence is like wildfire. You have no idea where it will take you. Isn't that an extraordinary way to be able to describe that?
I think so. So
Yeah.
we started with music. The story I have about confidence is, have you heard Aboriginal music recently? First of all, it invades and pervades all sectors of music, the blues, jazz, roots, etc. And there's a group out of the Six Nations, Brantford, Ontario, where Robbie Robertson, one of my heroes, comes from, called Digging Roots. Husband and wife, wonderful people and very beautiful people. When you listen to the words of their songs, they say it all. So the fact that this form of artistry is really proving that there is confidence and strength, all we're saying is, let's put it into other sectors. Let's put it into education. Let's put it into future of young people. And I think that ultimately that will make a big difference to Aboriginal people.
Well, thank you for playing such an important role in getting this initiative going. I wish you all the luck in the world, and thank you for coming in and joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.